positive results from his bullpen. 2-1 Sierra, deep right field, way back, goodbye, home run, Ruben Sierra, 8-4 Yankees.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not-So-Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me once again in the car on this Thursday early evening here in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz, get right to the guts of the episode. Now, October 3rd is a magical day in baseball history for a couple of reasons. One, it's Dave Winfield's birthday, former New York Yankees, San Diego Padre. I believe the only man to this day who was drafted in 3 professional sports. Although he never played a down of football, the Minnesota Vikings took a flyer. They said, man, his skill set, they didn't say skill set back then, but his athleticism would lend itself to, he'd probably be a hell of a tight end because he was a big guy, didn't really work out with weights, built like a brick shit house, the whole thing. But Dave Winfield, extraordinary baseball player, hit 500 home runs. I think he got to 3,000 hits. He was just fantastic. So he was born October 3rd, 1951, but something else happened on October 3rd, 1951. The single most famous, infamous home run in baseball history. The New York baseball Giants, who had come back from 13 games down, I think as late as August, to catch the good old Brooklyn Dodgers, and they played like what they're doing now, a best out of 3, playoffs. They didn't call it a wild card, but the two teams, the Dodgers and Giants, ended up tied. And rather than just do a knockout game, because they had done that in 1948 in the American League, the Red Sox versus the Cleveland Indians, not surprisingly, the Red Sox lost because the Red Sox always lost. They decided to do best out of 3. And the team split the first 2 games. The the Giants had a chance to win the second game. They kind of fucked it up. And in game 3, with the Dodgers ahead, I think it was 1st and 3rd, 1 out. And I want to say Brooklyn was up by 2, but they even could have been up by 1. But Bobby Thompson hit a series, if you want to call that a series, like a wild card series, ending home run over the left field wall at the Polo Grounds where the baseball Giants played. And that home run was always known as the shot heard around the world. The most famous home run to this day in baseball history. More famous than Chris Chambliss with the Yanks in '76. More famous than Joe Carter's literal World Series walk-off home run in '93 against Mitch Williams and the Philadelphia Phillies. It's the most famous home run in baseball history. But I'm a diehard Yankee fan. And October 3rd, 1995, 29 years ago tonight, I was 21 years old. I had started my second year at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, the Cinema Studies program. I knew a lot of people that were, in film production. I didn't do that. I just was academic. I was always just an academic, I guess. The irony being when I was in high school, I failed almost every class. Not much of an academic. But by the time I got to NYU, I guess you could say that I was really engaged by the material, and I started to behave as if I gave a shit. But the Yankees of more recent vintage, going back to the mid-1990s, they make the playoffs almost every season. But in 1995, they had gone 14 years, as I recently did an episode talking about this. They'd gone 14 seasons. It's unthinkable in the current times with all of with the structure and all of the wild card possibilities. If you have a team with that kind of payroll and any sort of a farm system, you're not going to go more than a couple of years without at least getting some kind of postseason scenario. You're just not. But back then it was more difficult because until 1995, you had to be a division winner. And then there was the championship series, but because of the strike, they had to make adjustments for the fans. So as a young Yankee fan still, 21 at the time, I was old enough. I mean, my Dad put me in front of the TV after Reggie Jackson hit his third home run against the Dodgers in '77, but I don't really, I think I remember a fragment. Big deal. I was literally 3 years old. And they did the same thing in LA the next year when they beat the Dodgers in '78. And I have vague memories of watching my dad get angry as the Yankees got swept out of the 1980 playoffs against Kansas City, and then just punting away the '81 World Series against the Dodgers. Just absolute horrendous that the Yankees took the first 2 games pretty easily at home and then dropped the next 4. And I believe they had leads in all 4 games. And a guy named George Frazier, no relation to Smokin' Joe, or Walt for that matter, George Frazier lost 3 games in the World Series. That is a record. I guarantee you that record's never going to be broken. They didn't really even hit him that hard. He beat him with a bunch of dribblers and ground balls. That's beside the point also. The Yankees had this dark period, and my fandom was at its peak. It was at its apex. I wanted to watch every pitch of every game starting in about 1985. Now, I was a kid, 10, 11 years old. I did somewhat have a bedtime, but my dad was very, very lenient when it came to me staying up to watch the games with him. He usually didn't send me to sleep. And my mom was always upstairs, and she would conk out at like 9. They didn't really make a big thing about bedtimes, at least by the time I was old enough, 5th grade, 6th grade. But it was horrible watching those Yankee teams of the 80s, Don Mattingly's prime, consistently come up short. Because, man, you win 97 games, you got to go to the postseason. And the 1985 Yankees, this is something you can Google. It was the best team that Mattingly ever played on. They had 3 Hall of Famers on the roster and 2 guys who, if they had a little bit longer of a prime, would have been in the Hall of Fame. The 2 close guys, Don Mattingly, Ron Guidry. The 3 Hall of Famers, Rickey Henderson, Dave Winfield, Phil Niekro. So you think about that. The Yankees, 20% of their roster were guys who either ended up in the Hall of Fame or were Hall of Fame level or even better in the case of Mattingly and Guidry when they were at their peak. And they still didn't go to the postseason because there was no fucking wild card. There was no process by which they did anything but go home because the Blue Jays ended the season with 2 more wins, I think it was. Awful. The team went downhill. They started to slip. And even though they would have made the postseason with a wild card structure in '87, they weren't that good. And then they went bad. '89 to '92, they were under 500 each year. Then they turned the corner. And in '95, the season appeared to be over. They had had the big year in '94, and then the strike. End of season August 12th. But 1995, they had that incredible 25-6 stretch to close the season. And instead of another lost year, and Showalter was going to go anyway. His contract was up. He for sure wasn't coming back if they lost, if they didn't make any postseason or even a big charge. And Mattingly was retiring. Everybody knew Donnie was only 34, but he was done. He could still hit, but you have to be better than a 300 singles hitter to play first base. You just do. It's an offense game, and that is an offense position. The sabermetrics guys, people, they take a lot of heat, but you'd rather have Adam Dunn hitting 200, drawing 120 walks, and hitting 40 homers than Don Mattingly not drawing that many walks and hitting 310 with 8 home runs. It's not even close. But the Yankees of that year had this extraordinary rally, and when they secured the postseason berth, it was relief, yeah, but the excitement level, not just for me, because I was over the moon, especially because they didn't seem to have a chance. That's where you get the excitement. When you expect to go, it's different. Not that you're not excited, but when you expect to make it, it doesn't hit the same way. And there were so many people. The city was buzzing. I don't want to say with Yankee fever, but the city was buzzing. The level, everybody was talking about it. Even non-baseball fans were starting to wear Yankee gear. Girlfriends wearing colors of the Yankees for their boyfriend. Oh, I don't even like baseball, but we're going to game 1. Whatever it was, there was so much excitement. And the other thing, and this is, again, inside baseball, this is the memory and me remembering the time. So Derek Jeter had come up. He had kind of a cup of coffee, is what they say. He had played a little, but he wasn't ready. He was not ready for prime time at that juncture. But the Yankees organization felt they were moving in the right direction and wanted to believe that this was going to be a perennial playoff team. So whether it was Steinbrenner, whether it was Gene Michael, whether it was the kind of younger version of Brian Cashman or George himself, we don't really know. Bob Watson, we don't know. But the Yanks made an organizational decision that Derek Jeter's going to sit on the bench. Hopefully we got more than one playoff series, but we want this kid to experience playoff baseball in the Bronx because he's going to be playing here. You know, it was the kind of, we're back, we're making a comeback, whatever. So Jeter was on the bench during the postseason. But the Seattle Mariners, who had beaten out the Angels, they ended up with the same record, and the Mariners won the kind of play-in game. It was just the one game that time to get to the wild card round against the Yankees, what's called the division series. It's still called the division series. Randy Johnson was in, when I tell you he was right in the middle of his prime, Randy actually had a pretty long prime, but Randy Johnson was as good as he was ever. The guy was fucking insanely good. He was throwing 100 miles an hour with a Guidry slider. He was ridiculous. So the Yankees were going to have the first two games at the stadium, and it was going to be a 2-3 format, which is not unusual. They had been doing that for the championship series when the championship series was best out of 5. For example, Yankees-Royals, first two games were in Kansas City, and then 3, 4, and 5 were in the Bronx. Now they would split it up like a 2-2-1 kind of format. But the Yankees got an incredible, historical, lucky break in that because the Mariners and Angels tied, they had the play-in game, and Randy Johnson had to pitch that game. And it was literally the day before Game 1. So Randy Johnson was not going to be available until at the earliest Game 3. So that gave the Yankees, at least in theory and on paper, a decided advantage. Because if the teams were evenly matched, but Randy Johnson, for example, was kind of an equalizer or made the Mariners more likely to be a favorite, even though we had, big pitchers with David Cone, who wasn't Randy Johnson, but he was still Cy Young caliber, and Jack McDowell, who had pitched great. But Game 1, the starters at Yankee Stadium, David Cone versus Chris Bosio. Now, Chris Bosio had an okay career, but Chris Bosio, if we're being honest, he shouldn't have been pitching Game 1 of a playoff series, but they didn't have a choice. And this is what happens in baseball sometimes. I remember in 2004, that horrible series, the Yankees ended up losing a 3-0 lead to the Red Sox. They ran out of pitchers. They simply ran out of pitchers. And I don't mean they didn't have anybody to pitch, but they didn't have anybody that you would have wanted starting those games. They ran out of pitchers. So the Mariners, they had traded for Andy Bennis, who was, all-star caliber pitcher, but Bennis wasn't ready for Game 1. He was going to go in Game 2. Bosio got the call, and the Yankees, they hit him hard. They hit him hard. And David Cone did not really pitch up to what he was capable of, but the Mariners, they had an incredible offense. It was just a ridiculous offense. Edgar Martinez, Hall of Famer, in middle of his prime, and Ken Griffey Jr. also right in the middle of his prime. They had so many skilled players. They had big home run hitters like, Jay Buhner, the infamous that we traded Ken Phelps, or we traded Buhner for Ken Phelps in '88. But that ended up working out to the Yankees' benefit historically, because if we had Buhner, we may not have eventually gotten Paul O'Neill 4 years after that trade. So you don't throw it back. It's just a historical footnote. That was a shitty trade. And Buhner was a terrific baseball player. He was almost a 5-tooler at his peak. So this Mariners team had incredible offense. Their bullpen was shit. It was really not a good bullpen. They had a couple of guys who were talented, but by and large, they had this guy with just a fantastic arm, Bobby Ayala. He wasn't that good. So the Yankees had a lead, and David Cone got hit hard. Cone gave up, I think Griffey got him. I don't know if Griffey hit 2 homers in that game, but Griffey tied the game with a home run in the 7th. Now you think about the excitement level. Michael Kay and John Sterling have both talked about the fact that the first 2 games at the stadium, the first New York Yankees playoff games of any kind in 14 freaking years, the noise level at the old ballpark never got as loud again, not even when they won the 1996 World Series. Don Mattingly's home run in Game 2, which maybe I'll get to in tomorrow's episode, that's the loudest they ever heard the building. Mattingly's home run. But Game 1, the excitement in the crowd the fans were just going crazy the whole game. Now, of course, they wanted to win, but the game all along, it seemed like, well, we're going to win this game because the Mariners pitching sucks and we've got David Cone. And they have the lead. It's 4-2 going to the 7th. You work statistically, the Yanks have got to be at least 90% to win. And fucking Griffey hits a home run. But the Yankees came up in the bottom half. And true to form, the Mariners bullpen could not hold it there. And Ruben Sierra hit just a moonshot skyscraper of a home run off the aforementioned Bobby Ayala, or Ayala as he pronounced it. And the Yanks ended up winning the game. They ended up winning 9-6. John Wetland, who had just an awful series, and he's probably why they ended up not winning the series. He came in and gave up 2 runs in the 9th. He just really got hit hard, but the Yanks already had a 9-4 lead, so it wasn't like, oh my God, we're going to lose the game. You want to believe and you kind of dream that you're going to win the World Series. And the great thing with the wild card, at least that structure, because it's tough to get through a knockout game and then a round and then another round and then you're in the World Series. But for most of the years of this, it was just best out of 5, best out of 7, World Series also best out of 7. And the Yankees had played very well. That was the year the Cleveland Indians went 144. They would have probably won 110, 112 games, give or take. They were a great team, but the Yankees had played them to more or less a standstill that year. The Yankees had been very, very tough on the Indians. They won some really critical games for the wild card chase in Cleveland, and the Indians weren't giving them shit. They wanted the Yankees to not make the postseason, and the Yanks won a couple of really, really exciting games in Cleveland that season. So the idea was, if the Yankees get by Seattle, it's baseball. It's a fucking crapshoot. Anything's possible. And just because you have the Indians 144 and the Yankees with a kind of pedestrian 79-65, again, the strike shortened season, they didn't begin it until a few weeks after they normally would have, and they didn't have time to try to cram in 162. They just, like with COVID, they played a 60-game season or whatever it was. This was a 140-game season. Yankee fans thought that if we got a crack at Cleveland, it's 50-50. They're not that big of a favorite, even though they, on paper, will be a huge favorite. Cone was pitching well. McDowell was pitching well. But when the Yankees won that first game, and knowing we were going to have the pitching advantage in the second game, because you know who was going for the Yankees? Andy Pettitte. In his rookie year, was already good enough to get the ball in a game 2 of a playoff series. And he was going to be going against Andy Bennis, who had been really tough in the National League. Didn't pitch that well with Seattle, but Seattle didn't have anybody else. That was kind of the bugaboo with those Lou Piniella teams with Seattle. They had the incredible offense, and Griffey Jr. just all world. You know, I hate to even say it this way, but Junior Griffey and Barry Bonds, before Barry Bonds became, 240-pound Barry, Junior was a better player. I'll go down on that hill. That prime Bonds and prime Junior, when they were the same weight, Junior was better. Junior was better. Junior was comparable to Mickey Mantle. And you could say that Bonds kind of was, but I feel like Junior was closer because his defense in center field, he was a better defensive outfielder than Mickey. But, I mean, that's all just opinion. But Junior was a one-man wrecking crew. He was so fucking good. The guy was amazing. And I remember Mike Francesa talking about this years later. That Mike Francesa said, before Bonds, just went whatever, he said that Junior was the best player that he ever saw other than Mickey Mantle. And for Francesa, who pretty much was just a crank and seemed to hate everybody, I mean, he loved Bernie Williams. He loved Roberto Clemente. But he said, Junior, in that series, that was about as good as anybody ever played the sport. He did everything right. He had one big hit, big home run after another. He was just incredible. Even as a Yankee fan, you could respect that. But when we won that first game, knowing we had the advantage, and it was just because of the Randy Johnson factor, it felt like game 2 was also a must win. And it ended up not really making any difference. But 95, Showalter's last year, I love Buck Showalter. He was very young at the time, relatively speaking. And we knew Donnie was going to go. But on that roster were people who became major contributors to the World Series winning team the following year. like Pettit, Posada was a backup. I think Posada actually was with the September call-ups. I don't think he was the primary backup during that season. But Mariano Duncan hadn't gotten there. We had Tony Fernandez playing shortstop. And, but we had guys like Jimmy Key and Wade Boggs and Darryl Strawberry. And Mariano Rivera's rookie year, it took Buck Showalter a couple of months to figure out how best to deploy Mariano. And he got the usage right in the playoffs, but I still feel like he could have done more because Wetland just didn't have it. And Mariano actually got the win the following night. He pitched 3 scoreless innings. We knew that this kid is not, there's nothing random. This guy has got whatever the it is, he's got it because he's a fucking rookie. And he just walked out there against the best offense in baseball, certainly one of the best offenses of the last 3 decades. And he froze them for 3 innings. That was actually, as I said, in game 2. But Mariano was pivotal in that series. I don't even think he got scored on in that series. He pitched better in 95 than he did for portions of the 96 postseason, where a couple of times he was a little bit shaky. When we won that, though, you start dreaming. And then when they won game 2, even more. And there were people in New York like Mike Lupica, like Marty Noble. Those are 2 of the local sports writers. I think Noble has passed, but Lupica is still very much active. I met him not far from where I now live. I met him at the Longwood Library in October of 2019, or maybe it was September. And he remembered this series. He remembered so much of it because to his eyes, it was the best 5-game series that he ever was witness to. Just so many ups and downs and twists and turns. But even people who didn't like the Yankees, like Lupica, they appreciated, and from a historical standpoint, they were thrilled that they were in the playoffs, that they were at Yankee Stadium, this incredible ballpark, for postseason baseball. It was hard not to pick up the excitement of the crowd. It's like way back in 1986, it's ridiculous. I was at game 3 of the 1986 National League Championship Series between the Mets and the Astros. And the Mets won that game on a walk-off home run by Lenny Dykstra off Dave Smith, who the Mets just, Dave Smith was like how many times he make the All-Star team? Is almost a Hall of Fame closer. The Mets just owned the guy. I don't know why. They just always hit the guy. But even though I was rooting against the Mets, I was vociferously rooting against the Mets. I was 12 years old. But it was hard not to get into the game more because the crowd was so excited. And I wish that I could have gone to one of those games in the 95 postseason. My dad and I had opportunity to go to one playoff game in 96 the next year, and Dad rolled the dice, and the corporate box seats that his company had owned a piece of, the partners only got one choice of one game throughout the postseason, and my dad picked game 7. So if there had been a game 7 of the 1996 World Series, my dad and I would have been there about 30 feet from the field. But when you get to a game 6, as the Yankees did, just win the World Series. As great as it would have been to go to a game, maybe the Braves beat us 10-0 and the game's over in the 3rd inning. So you don't throw it back. But 29 years ago tonight, with Derek Jeter cheering everyone on, and who knew what he was going to be, who knew that Mariano Rivera was going to be Mariano Rivera? Well, Jim Leyritz was on that Yankee team. He started at catcher. And we all know what he ended up doing in the 96 World Series, and then in the 99 World Series, another huge home run. But on this day, 1995, the Yankees returned to the postseason, and the incredible excitement and the fun factor of having playoff baseball back in the Bronx, off the charts. And the irony is, as great a game as game 1 was, game 2, which I'm sure I'll talk about tomorrow, is a top 5 greatest games in the history of Major League Baseball. Almost everybody would put it in the top 10. I'm going to put it in the top 5. It was just one of those incredible nights where, extra innings and multiple lead changes. When you have lead changes and both teams scoring in an extra inning and a game doesn't end, that's when you know a game has reached epic status. Game 2 of the 1995 American League Division Series went 15 innings and ended in the rain. But that's a story for tomorrow. This has been episode 317 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for once again joining me for a little baseball history with maybe a new school approach. But if you catch this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, or the others on which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.